Ladies and gentlemen, welcome all to the first ever podcast show with Sports Minds with Manny James Games. Thank you so much for joining me. Round of applause, everyone. Important details here. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to remind you here to make sure to follow my podcast here, Sports Minds with Manny James Games. Those of you that know me for years know that this is what I do. If you talk to me, had conversations with me in private, you know this is what I love, right? I step into fantasy football. I run my leagues. I've been a league manager for a long time now. I run very good leagues. I have a really good return core. And the reason why I'm here today is because anybody, I've had my guys always telling me that I should start one. And I know you're thinking, another football podcast, isn't there a million out there? Yes, they are. And what separates me from those guys, I can sit here and tell you I won my league multiple times, which is not really a huge accomplishment, right? People are like, what kind of leagues does he run? Right? There's no legitimacy to that. I can't sit here and tell you that I've hit big on DraftKings or FanDuel. That's, I'm not a daily fantasy guy. I'm just a season-long fantasy guy. That's what I focus on. Everybody needs to have something that they're particularly good at, and that's me. That's what I focus on. I love season-long fantasy, and I'm going to continue to, dominate a season-long fantasy. If you play in my leagues, thank you for the money, because it's easy. Nah, I'm just kidding. And I always make sure to have the right guys in my league here. But today I'm going to make it real easy. I'm trying to help you set up your fantasy draft strategy. It's very important when it comes to fantasy football. A lot of guys do their research last minute and go by that. I don't like that because, there's a lot of pressure that goes into draft, especially when it's a money league, right? You got to buy in, money's on the line, right? You got to make sure that draft counts because at the end of the day, you're going to be stuck with those players most of the season. Granted, you can always make trades. I'm one to always wheel and deal, but I'll get into that later, of course. But, setting that proper foundation for you is going to be important, and by foundation, a lot of people like to, have different opinions on what that is. I'll tell you what I think, what I believe, what's worked for me. Everyone's different. Some have very successful tactics and methods that work for them. I'm just going to tell you how I think, right? And, at the end of the day, if this helps you get better, right? Or even if it adds one little wrinkle to your game, makes you better, then, it's a success. In my opinion, it's a success. That's what I look at. Every year I have the same approach now. I take a very methodical approach. I want to do the same thing, same prep, same systems, and actually upon every year I do add a new wrinkle to my game, whether it's something that I saw, picked up off someone else, or of course, I make notes at the end of the season. At the end of the day, that's what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking to get better and give myself an edge every single time.
He is so smart.
All right, so now let's go ahead and jump into these tactics that you can use to utilize, fantasy football season the right way, doing your research. So that's the first thing. Obviously, the most important factor is do your research. Like I said, don't do it last minute. You need to dive into it. I would say at least on average, if you don't have the time and dedication that I do or the passion that I do for it, I'm already we're talking about right now. We're in May, June, and I'm sitting here doing this. So that tells you how I approach the game, right? How I love the game. And I already have my rankings, which one thing I can tell you that changes all the time. Right, like you make changes, you see new news that come out, you see training camp information, that's part of your research, right? So I look at everything. I look at who the player is, right? I look at what system he's in. I look at the people around him in the system, everything from coaching to schemes to actual players, and then based upon that, I I form an opinion. So I think that it's important to form your own opinion. You can copy somebody else, but you're not going to feel, good or bad about it, right? Because if you end up hitting something right, and you know, kind of not necessarily guess, but prep for it, then it makes you feel like this is something I could build upon, right? Something I could be good at. So I think that's where I built my foundation is, consistently year in, year out, people that play my leagues know that I'm going to draft some good players, and not every one of them is going to hit. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to make trades throughout that season. I'm going to wheel and deal. But I do that because I do my research. I do my listen to my experts. I actually prefer podcasts over TV and NFL.com, whatever that all these different places that do fantasy football, and these are experts, granted, right? But when it comes to these experts, like, I'm not saying that I know more than them. I'm saying that I look at it from a different perspective as them, right? Like, I'm sure as players they have more perspective than I will ever have, and that is true. I don't deny that, but my approach is more database. My approach is more numbers based, right? Because children lie, your wife lies, your mother lies, but the numbers never lie, right? So at the end of the day, when I look at that, I look at obviously production from last year. I research on, if they had any changes to their situation from last year, this year. For example, O-line's a big one, right? You got to look at their O-line. You look at their, their offensive weapons around them, right? What kind of scheme are they running? Are they, what option are they on that offense, right? Especially when we're talking about fantasy football, because most you are going to be invested into, positions, right? So running back, wide receiver, probably the most important positions, right? Because not saying that the other positions are important, but for fantasy purposes, those are going to be the guys that win your league. So some guys have an approach where they just, go with, excuse me, they go with the top ranked running backs right out the gates. I've seen guys that go first 3 or 4 rounds running back, and I'll admit, I took that approach back in the day as well, years ago. I took that approach. And one thing that I learned is running backs get hurt, right? And to me, I feel like I don't want to invest my first 4 picks into 1 or 2 guys that could possibly, get injured for the season, right? I feel like you're putting all your eggs in one basket when you do it that way. My opinion is to diversify, right? You need to hit best player available, and at the same time, don't forget positions and needs. The good thing with fantasy football is you only have certain positions, right? So I prioritize players based upon position when it comes to my overall rankings, because I do like to set a top 200 players, whatever it is, whatever my total is at the end there. So, but by doing my research, I know which ones I'm going to go ahead and, prioritize here, right? Like, I'm going to see what the numbers look like. I'm going to look at what this player averaged last year, and projections for this year, because projections typically very similar. So that's never going to be like, unless it's a freak accident, you're going to be pretty close. Or unless it's a new scheme, like I said, you're going to be pretty close. So that's something that I look at. So make sure you find an expert that you like. And not just to one. I like to get different perspectives. So I listen to at least 3 or 5 different sources when it comes to players. And, that means I'm going to probably listen to 3 or 5 different opinions on a certain player. And based upon that opinion is, where I look at it and I make sense myself. What, critical thinking or deductive reasoning, whatever you would call it. What opinion do I agree with the most? I can tell you the opinion that I disagree with the most is probably Max Kellerman. No, I'm just kidding. Guy's the worst. Can't believe he got on TV. He's just, I wish I could have his job. But, I mean, at the end of the day, I guess, it's not about what you know, it's who you know, right? And that guy gets ratings because people hate him. And anyways, not to get sidetracked here, but research is important. Um, the next thing that I recommend for a successful fantasy offseason is mock drafts, and a lot of them. I'm not talking about a few here. I'm talking about I probably do like a good 100 plus mock drafts in the off season. No joke. And the reason why that is because I like to practice. Post draft, of course, right? I would do a couple of mocks here, not anything crazy. I like to do a mock drafts. Obviously, off season and training camp. That's where I really jump in and start doing a ton of them. And then, of course, leading up until your fantasy season kicks off. So I will constantly do mock drafts because the rankings change. You have players that may have been on the bottom of the ranks going into the off season, or starting post draft, and then all of a sudden they moved up the leaderboards because now they have this really great report, talking about how much chemistry they have with their quarterback or whatever, and all of a sudden that's the hottest thing since sliced bread, right? Everybody wants a piece of it. Everybody wants it, and unfortunately, once everybody catches wind, that player's draft position ADP changes. ADP stands for average draft position, and you have players. For example, if you have a player that you like, right, and he's drafted typically a little bit later, well, when you go ahead and start drafting them earlier, you start affecting those mock drafts, because those mock drafts take percentage of what people are doing, and then based upon after a certain number of people touching that player, moving that player, grabbing that player at a certain position, it changes that ADP, and it also changes ESPN's overall rankings. So because of that, I think there's a way that you can manipulate that a little bit. For example, if I have a player I love that's not getting drafted by many people in a certain round, and I think it's a good value for that particular round, what I do is when I get to that round, I don't actually draft that player. I draft a player right next to him, and I leave it as is, knowing that player is it's already off my draft board. So I take him off my draft board because I know, hey, I'm going to be able to get this player in this round, and obviously as time progresses, it changes, but doing it this way kind of sets you up the right way to be able to really just get the best draft possible, and that's the goal here. So I always practice in many different positions. So I'll draft any first to 12th. All my leagues are 12-man leagues. I won't join anything less. Maybe more, but not really. But that is something that's very important. These guys are you can't get used to a certain position because everything is randomized, and you're never going to know what you're going to get. Sorry, technical difficulties here. We're back in order. So yeah, practice many different positions, 1 through 12. I always like to practice in all of them, right? So I'll do many different mocks. In those 100 plus mocks, I'm doing 10 of each, right? At the bare minimum, 10 first, 10 20s. And honestly, I could even tell you I probably do up to 200 mock drafts in the off season, because when I think about it, 10 times I'm drafted in each position, that's at least 120 mock drafts. And I know that when I think about it, I probably do more than 10 per each position. I probably do like 15, 20. So that would put me more along the 200, 240 side, which, it's why I am so good when it comes to my live drafts, because I know, where pretty much where I'm going to get some value in a certain position, and I'm going to grab it because I know that, it may not be there next time, right? So obviously, as we get that farther down the line, different podcasts, I'll go ahead and go over different things as far as what I'm looking at for those specific ones, or at specific draft strategy. But that's not something I'm going to go into today. Today is just about letting you know, hey, this is what you need to do, and this is what's going to help you.
Rude.
All right. So those of you that joined me here today, I really appreciate the support. You're definitely the reason why I'm doing this, right? I have so much love for the game, passion for the game. You know, I've been a student of the game for a long time. And I can tell you that fantasy football is one of my great pleasures in life. I love it. I love playing it. I love talking about it. I love discussing it with other people. You know, it's just, you know, one of my passions. So, you know, for those of you that support me, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in here today. Just make sure to hit the follow button or the like button, you know, so that way you can catch the next one. So to all of you, thank you so much for joining me. This man James Games, and God bless all of you.